This lecture is being brought to you in part by the generous gifts of these sponsors.
Test. Ooh, loud. Can everybody hear me? Too loud or okay?
Perfect.
Awesome. For those of us who are hearing challenged. So, thank you for coming out. Happy holidays. Unfortunately, my better half could not be here this evening, but it should be a fun talk. I'm not going in. I did some work in telecom, fiber. We had a sponsor with fiber. Part of before we get into this talk, something that I did with NASA was to try to use surgical robots to operate from one point of the world to another, and from the Earth to space and to the moon. So you can't do that with fiber to the moon, but you can definitely do it with fiber, on the Earth. So we're going to talk today about wearable devices. So I don't know if anybody here is wearing wearable devices. A lot of people. I got a whole bunch of them on. You might see some you're familiar with, and there's a great promise, as I said in the sort of summary of the talk. There's a great promise for wearable devices, but we haven't gotten there yet. There's some real challenges with them too. As Lori mentioned, I am CSO and Senior Research Scientist at IHMC, and I've had the opportunity, the blessing of being able to go do some interesting things, sort of a journey across the last, goodness, 40 years. So that's me operating a surgical relief organization I started in Africa. We went to Africa and we're teaching the doctors and nurses there how to use advanced medical equipment and also take care of patients. As a surgeon, I'm very, very obviously protective of patients. That's the first responsibility we have, is to help patients. That's not necessarily operating on them. That is to help them be healthy, live long, productive lives. I will say, that being said, I'm very pragmatic and utilitarian. So if a technology is not going to be able to be used for something good, we don't need it. We just throw it away. And definitely in the operating room, if there's something that isn't helping you, you don't use it. It sits in the side as a big doorstop or a paperweight, and you just move on. The other thing, DARPA, for those who aren't familiar, DARPA does the super high technology development. The internet, it was not Al Gore, in fact, was a DARPA project. Siri on your phone, you guys may not be familiar, but that was a DARPA project that IHMC, in fact, helped develop. So Siri is one of the technologies. The Da Vinci robot that I helped to develop, that was another DARPA project. So there's some very cool things that I won't be able to talk about on that other side because some of that work is classified, but I will say that some of the groups that we work with might be on, you might hear their names in the newspaper or hear them in video games, if you like video games. So some very well-known flight organizations, Top Gun kind of pilots, but some very elite special forces operators. So we have used some of the same technologies we developed for medicine in the research space. And we like pushing the technologies forward at IHMC, but the human remains the center. That's the key for us, human-centered technologies. So, and the other reason I put it up there, you got to be very careful about people talking about technologies that they own or that they have stock in a company. And I do not have any stock in any companies. I don't own any of these things. I work with these companies, but I don't get paid by them. And of course, for the Department of Defense and NASA, I have to say that this is just my opinion. So that's why I'm telling you a little bit about who I am. It's my opinion. That does not reflect the DoD, SOCOM, Air Force, Navy, et cetera. It is just my opinion. I will say, though, there might be some intellectual property. You'll see some pretty cool ideas in here that there have been some patents filed, so at some point maybe there will be some companies. So that's the good part about IHMC. We're very good at that. So current state. So at DARPA, the way they have this catechism or questions that they have, if you're trying to develop the revolutionary technology that's going to disrupt the world, they say you follow these questions after one of the directors from a long time ago named Hallmeyer. And where are you currently? What problems do you have? And what revolutionary technology could you develop that would disrupt it? That's sort of the model. And so I looked at that. So it's amazing to me now that 1 out of 5 people is wearing a fitness tracker of some sort. So that's a lot. That's a very big market. Medical devices, if you look at what I would put on patients to monitor their diabetes or to monitor their heart in the ICU, they're very, very good, high-quality data. They're very expensive, and the FDA regulates them, so it's very hard to get them approved. Where we have seen recently in the last, say, 2 or 3 years particularly, is the medical companies are saying, well, we got these amazing technologies, why don't we push it over into the health side? So no longer say we're going to treat a disease, but we're going to help somebody live longer. There's a story in the news in the last 2 weeks. If we had everybody exercise with wearing an activity tracker to the level of the most active people, everyone in the United States over the age of 40, it would increase the life expectancy by 5 years. So, you know, those are big claims. Whether or not that will actually happen is a different story. So you'll see I'm going to talk a little bit about heart rate, activity monitors or accelerometers, and then glucose monitors. So as you'll see, I have the whole suite of them on. And this is the bottom line sort of up front. If a lot of people are saying, oh, what should I get my spouse for maybe I'll get her a new AirPod 2 Pro that does a hearing test, or maybe I'll get her a new Apple Watch, because my wife loves to track her steps, by the way. But those are great, but where we are now, honestly, and you'll see from some of the data I present that they can detect a change in health status. I'm going to show you how I got COVID, and it totally messed up all my data. Not that COVID is a super, bad disease, and not that it's super symptomatic, but you'll see how it changed. And my wearable device knew about me getting COVID 3 days before I had any symptoms. So, and I'll show you that in here. And so, the other thing that these do is they provide motivation, like I was talking about for my wife. She unfortunately was diagnosed with a couple kinds of cancer, and breast cancer being one of them, and lymphoma being the other one. And she went through chemo and was dragged down pretty low from that, and it took a lot of work and motivation to get herself back up to a point. And recently, by national parks, we actually went to Utah, and she was able to, after working up with her steps, she was able to go hiking in the national parks in the mountains. So, that's a good motivational story. And the one thing I will say, and you'll see for sleep, it really does help build good habits. If you use them the right way, the wearables can build good habits. But why don't they work? So let's go on to the next one. So unfortunately, the data is pretty poor. If I take off my watch and I put it on this stand for the next 10 or 15 seconds or so, it's still going to give me a heart rate despite the fact that I'm not wearing it, because the algorithm is still clicking along thinking that it's tracking my heart rate, which it's not. So that obviously is not good enough to make like a medical decision if you were taking care of someone in the ICU. The security and privacy, we all know, the saying is, if you are not paying for the product, you are the product. Unfortunately, the companies are scraping all of your data, and they are developing these huge AI machine learning algorithms, but they're using your data to do it. So it is really important to protect yourself. And you'll see there's some particular military spins for that too. It's very important for us to not divulge where our warfighters are located, and if they're wearing wearables, you can track that if they're wearing the wrong one. So, and the other is AI is obviously the rage. You can ask ChatGPT and it'll tell you that it is the rage. But the processor cores on the devices and the batteries, it burns crazy amounts of power. So that is a reason why we're not doing a lot of AI on the edge. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this project that we have a cooperative agreement with the Department of Defense to develop new wearables called APEX. I'll talk about that in a moment. It's advanced wearable devices and AI. I'm going to show you some really cool e-skin, electronic skin materials, and then tactical non-invasive nerve stimulators. And don't get... Don't get spooked. It's not like super soldier kind of stuff. It is, all these technologies have been used for medical in the past and are basically transitioning into use for performance and health. So this particular, if you think about it, that's a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. I don't whoever's a military veteran or Air Force veteran, thank you for your service. I was never active duty. The amazing thing about those planes, their missions are like a day and a half now. Very small crew, couple pilots. They have they take off, they fly around the world, they refuel over the ocean, they deliver what they need to deliver, and then they come back. So think about how stressful and, more importantly, how tired you would be if you were flying for 36 hours around the world. And one of the primary causes of air mishaps in the civilian world and definitely in the military world is, in fact, falling asleep. It's fatigue and making bad decisions when you're sleepy. So that was sort of the motivation. That's billions of dollars worth of airplane. But you know what they ignored at the beginning while they were designing this, like they do with every technology? They like the shiny toys. They ignored the person that's flying the air. So we need to be able to monitor the performance, the mental capacity, the fatigue of the pilot, and that's what this project is. And then potentially say, hey, you're tired right now, take a nap. You're tired right now, give yourself a stimulator on your vagal nerve, or have some caffeine, do something. You need to do something. So that's this project. You'll see our list of, so I'm not going to go too long, but you'll see our list of partners. They're Polar. Some of you might be wearing Polar watches. They're super good. Abbott. Some of you are diabetics. Some of you, they now are taking their diabetic glucose monitors, and I'm not a diabetic, but you can track your glucose, and it's surprisingly useful. I did not think as a surgeon it was going to be, but it is. Medtronic implantables, we'll briefly touch upon that. Texas Instruments makes the best, largest producer of chips probably in the United States, one of the largest ones in the world, but they have some great processing cores and low-cost tech. And then you'll see there the eSkin, the vagal nerve stimulator, and then some testing and security related tech that we're going to talk about. So are you guys, anyone here a provider, a healthcare provider? Awesome. So you guys can go to sleep for a little while. I will say autonomic nervous system. So everybody knows sort of fight or flight, rest and digest. So the way your body sort of regulates itself is with this autonomic nervous system. If you got somebody coming to attack you, or your body says, it's time. It's either time for us to get ready or to run away. And so what happens, you'll see in here, is your body does things across itself, such as increases your heart rate. Your heart rate goes up because you need blood to go around. The liver releases glucose, so you have energy to fight or fly. And then after that leaves, what happens is your body says, okay, calm down, rest and digest. So you need to have a little bit of stress in your life. If you don't have stress in your life, what happens is you become a couch potato. And if we're older, what happens is you use it or you lose it. So you need to have some stress. The problem is when it's too much stress, or you don't have the stress go away so you can recover. So that's what we're going to talk about as a way to sort of measure this autonomic nervous system and the amount of stress. So there's a nerve called the vagus nerve, runs from the brain down to the body, from the body back up to the brain. It's depicted there. So that's sort of the way your autonomic nervous system helps, like, get your heart rate up, for example. It helps you to release glucose so that you're ready to fight or fly. And so if anyone does wearable tracking, what you'll see in this, everybody talks about HRV, heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is basically, if you look at the top line there, it's just the amount that your heart rate changes in between each beat. So if you think about it, your heart rate goes up, but the other thing that happens is When you are stressed and you're in the fight or flight state, you have a very constant, faster beat. If you are relaxed, chilling out, what happens is your heart rate varies, beat to beat. So you'll see it goes from 0.9 to 1.2. And so by measuring your heart rate, you can figure out what your stress level is. You can figure out whether or not you've recovered with good sleep, whether or not you're eating a good diet. And so some of these things that we're going to talk about, one of the first things we're going to talk about is this heart rate as a means to assess your performance. How do you get these data? I've already talked about it a little bit. We have commercial partners that have some of the best devices. You need to have a device that you can wear in the field. So those are those MILS standards. So it can get wet, it can go underwater, it can fly on airplanes. There's a difference between the ones that you wear on your wrist and the ones you wear on your chest. So these ones on the wrist are very convenient, but they don't do a very good job, unfortunately, with regards to the data quality, as good as the one on the chest. But a lot of people, men and women in the military, men don't want to have this strap going across. In women, it is honestly, depending on how the system is designed, it's really not pleasurable to wear your sports bra with an ECG monitor in it. So these are a couple of devices that we have tested. They're amazing and getting ever better. The one that's down below is not one that's been widely released, but if you think about it, and you're out training or out in the field somewhere, sometimes it's an advantage to not have a really bright light broadcasting where you are. So that one at the bottom has pretty much the same functionalities, but it lasts a lot longer and it doesn't have a big screen on it, among other things. And then they're starting to integrate some of their devices with, like, I don't know if anybody uses a thermometer that checks your temperature in your ear, but you can check your temperature, core temperature, and your heart rate, and we're combining that with the watch, and the other one is combining it with a glucose monitor, and I'll show you the reason why. So here's what I was talking about, poor data quality. So we did a comparison of this chest strap, which that's an electrocardiogram, so it's checking the heart by the electrical signal, and this one is an optical heart rate tracker on the wrist. So if you look at the data as they were out doing their normal military activities, there was an 11 beat per minute difference between the one that's on the wrist and the one that's on their chest, which is obviously too much. 10% error rate, I'll put a shout out to our friends at the Air Force Research Lab, this STRONG lab. They basically are taking all the wearables that are on the market, because you hear these amazing claims, and then you actually use them and you find that they're not that. So they're comparing every device pretty much that we might want to use. And they were the ones that demonstrated that. So it gets worse the farther you go into extreme environments. So if you're flying on a helicopter, and the vibration, it makes it so your data's worse. If you're flying on a jet aircraft and pulling 9 Gs, it's worse. And the other is, I'm a trauma surgeon by training, so I want to know what someone's heart rate is. I want to know what their lactate level is, because I want to save their life. And if you got that kind of error, or I have missing segments where I don't have a heart rate, I can't give them blood. I can't take them to the operating room based on that. It's not useful data. So that's the first thing. The data quality is not great. And here's what I was talking about for me. I agreed to share my data, so you don't have to worry. I had to do military essential travel. I've had COVID 4 times. I haven't had it bad, so not a big deal. But the first 2 times I had it, my baseline temperature at nighttime, because this Oura Ring has a temperature sensor on it, and my resting heart rate for 2 days beforehand, 2 to 3 days beforehand, were elevated. And I'm like, man, something's going on, and then I got symptoms. Unfortunately, the last time I got it, the last 2 times I've had it now, my heart rhythm changed. So there's some rhythms that are not a big deal, and some that are more of a big deal. This is not a super big deal unless it happens real frequently. So this, if you look at this tracing, here, let me see. this one up here is what would be, this is from my Ultra watch, actually. It's very good tracing. I showed it to my brother, who's a cardiologist, and he's like, that's pretty good. But so this is what would be a normal sinus rhythm. And once again, the heart rate variability is this period that's in between the peaks they're measuring. What happens is I got, with COVID, this premature ventricular contraction. So you'll see, all of a sudden, that is no longer a regular heart rhythm. So what happened to me? I'm like thinking, oh, hey, I'm rocking my sleep. I am recovered. I'm getting in the 90s. I got the greatest sleep score. I'm so proud of myself. And okay, not bad. And then all of a sudden, it starts to not be so good. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing left. And I'm like, oh my God, did the company upgrade the software or something that I don't know about? But that was, in fact, the start of COVID for me. So I got this irregular heart rate, and then I went and tested. I got a cold a couple days later, tested myself, and it was COVID. So it was a good, if nothing else for that, it was good. But, obviously, from the standpoint of this is unusable. If I'm trying to track my sleep and I'm sick, or I got a irregular heart rhythm, it won't work. So that needs to be fixed. This is from, we do an integrated exam, event exercise with international military partners. And we wanted to test to see whether or not we could use all the devices we're developing in the military settings. So we put it on a medic. We put all these devices, the GridX, that's the watch, the Polar Team Pro chest strap, the glucose monitor on them, and we had them transport simulated patients in 4 different flights. And the good news is we were successful. The bad news is that, yet again, the high-quality chest ECG signal, not so good if you're wearing a wristwatch, and that's all you're wearing, because the vibration makes it so that you're not getting very good signal. And the one thing you can say is that the sympathetic nervous system, the fight-or-flight one, you could see it. So you could see it in our data. When he was transporting the patient and carrying the patient, he got stressed. So it does work. So that is good news. But there's some things that we're doing to make it better, and that is to take some of these Texas Instrument technologies that are super cheap because they're made for telecom and they're made for other things, and they're making billions of these chips a year. So we can do some very interesting things by changing the circuit design and better digitize the data. And once again, $3.60 is crazy inexpensive. What we will say, better quality electrocardiograms, even better quality than what we do in the hospital. And this IPG is basically a way to measure tissue edema and or blood flow. So we're going to be able to do that like potentially at an unprecedented level in the upcoming year. The one thing that is amazing to me, yet again, is the bottom thing. It's a 600 megaflop per second CPU, or central processing unit. Back in the day when I was a computer science major in undergrad, that would be like a supercomputer. And we're now like doing that on wearable devices. It just burns through the battery is the problem. So, and it's very hot, it runs hot. But it's amazing what we are doing. And just to show you, we did actually, DARPA asked us to develop some of these technologies. So they had a pilot, unfortunately, that died on a, once again, it was unclear what happened in the flight mishap, whether or not he was fatigued, whether or not he had some physiologic event, or there was some question whether or not he was exposed to super high levels of electromagnetic radiation. So a lot of people worry about like, oh, I'm holding my phone too close to my head, I might get a cancer. That's probably not, in fact, a problem, but in the military, some intentional, there are very high-powered radar systems. Some of these systems are strong enough, you can like cook, it's like a microwave oven. You could cook tissue with it. And so there was some concern. So we built a device that the pilots could wear, and we flew it on F-16s. And we were able to track where their position was at the same time they were doing different things and show when their electromagnetic radiation exposure went up. And this is non-ionizing, but you can also do radiation detection and some other things, volatile organic gases. The reason why I also put this up there, it was a super cool project called Iceman for after Top Gun. But you look at this and man, if you were an adversary, wouldn't you love to know where our pilots were flying and what electromagnetic signatures all our electronic equipment on these super advanced fighter planes had. So that brings up, we tested this a little bit also at our Bold Quest, the same one where we flew the wearables on the Medic. So if you look at that, this is just GPS data from this Polar Team Pro chest. And that's just tracking a couple people who are in this. You can tell where people are. You can tell you would tell if you were an adversary and there was you saw some news stories probably in the last couple years, they could basically say exactly where everything is on a forward operating base or a military base if you didn't protect your data. And that is obviously not good. So data and privacy are key. So one of our partners is a company called Vigilife, and they have what they like to say is this safeguard is like checking an engine light for warfighters. It's also for construction workers that might be getting overheated, but you can then have a privacy a handshake where you can say, I don't want my boss to see where I am. I don't want my boss to see my heart rate. I don't want my, et cetera. So it's, I think, a very important technology. We demonstrated this as well and then I will say, once again, I can't go into the name of some of the groups that we worked with, but we did prove that this actually works. So the heart rate variability in the most elite operators, we basically, in a selection event that was a week long where it's like hell, I'll just say that this particular event might be like hell. Might be called something like Hell Week or something close to that, although this was actually not with that particular Navy selection. But we found, in fact, that you can determine who is going to be a good operator and is going to have a longer, more successful career because they are able to, they have a higher rest and digest state at baseline. When they start getting ready to do what they need to do, they all of a sudden get jazzed up and are ready to go. They have a very high level, and then they rapidly go back to baseline. So we saw that, which is, it's not true for everybody. So there is some opportunity to use this. I'm not a big fan of selection, neither are those operators because they want to do their job, but it is a great opportunity to help optimize their training and let them recover because they sacrifice an awful lot. So one of the challenges that we have, I'm going to just do a couple cool tech. These will be very quick. Cool. So this is this electronic skin. So has anyone ever been into the hospital, gotten an EKG, where they got to put the little pads on you? There's these very popular ones called red dots that you stick on, and then you snap the leads on. So those are great, but unfortunately, if you are like sweating, or if you're hairy, or if you are going outside swimming, for example, they don't work. So we wanted to develop something that would allow pilots, might allow someone who's crawling through the mud or diving underwater to be able to get better signals so that we could have better quality data. And our collaborator, it's very cool. I'm not a material scientist, but he has like published 800 papers. I mean, he's just a rock star. He basically said, there are some materials that we can make at atomic layer thinness, and then we can put them on top of each other, sort of in a sheet, stick them to the skin, and what you'll see down here is that it's so thin, it's nanometers thick, that it looks like a tattoo. So it is very conductive of electricity, so you can get all the measurements that we want. It also is transparent in the infrared region, so we can do optical related stuff if we want as well. So it was, he developed this over a period of a couple months, and if you look, here's just an early prototype. It's on somebody's wrist. We have the ultra-thin electrodes. There's one of those red dots I was talking about. So we put a red dot at the same spot as one of these ultra-thin electrodes, and then we asked the person to do this. And what you see in this tracing over here, the one that's the ultra-thin one, you hope to see these big peaks, and then you want to see a pretty flat line in between. You'll see what happens down there when they wear the red line. You get all that noise in there. That's not good. So it's 3 to 5, in some cases it's even 10 times better than what the state of the art is. So, and you'll see on this next one that it is super easy to put in. You put on, you just get a little PTFE or Teflon and you roll it on the skin. It's stable in water, it's safe, non-toxic, and then if you put a little soap on it, it comes right off. And it lasts, they're some of the postdocs, so this is somewhat humorous. They're from South Korea, but they're working at Georgia Tech and at IHMC, and so the test for them was to go out in the Florida heat while wearing this and then run around and see when they got really sweaty whether or not it would come off, and then to go into the freezer for 5 minutes to see whether or not it got cold enough that it would have a problem, and it worked fine. So, and this is the one that's a little spooky to some people, but I guess from a medical standpoint, anyone know what these loop recorders are? So anyone, I won't ask, but so if you look at these devices, they're small. They're like a AAA battery. If you look at the size of this will last for 7 years. Basically, in 30 seconds, you can make a little skin incision, put it in the fat right above the heart, and it's super important for patients that are having syncope or passing out. They don't know the reason why. It could be a seizure. It could be they're having low heart rate and their blood pressure drops. They can put this in, and when there's something is detected that's abnormal, they will end up recording it, and then the doctor can look at it and make a diagnosis. So there's some ability to make these even smaller coming up in the future, but we're going to compare this. Some people that have had it, unfortunately, for health is the great equalizer. So young people, and not as frequently, but they have syncope like older people do. Some young people have had syncope, still have these in. And we're going to have them wear all these wearables and then have them do some exercise to see whether or not it is any better quality data, more constant data wearing these. All right, moving on. CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. I'll just give you a very brief summary of what these are. So that's what I have on my arm, sort of blown out over there. This is an Abbott one. There's another company called Dexcom Stelo, maybe Dexcom. Some people in the room might even be wearing Dexcom or Abbott Freestyle Libres. Medtronic also has a version. And what happens is basically you have this tiny little needle. It doesn't really hurt when you put it in, but a tiny little needle that puts in this flexible electrode that lasts for 2 weeks. And it basically, when the oxygen and the glucose come around this, an enzyme converts this into hydrogen peroxide and an electron, and then you can look at the electricity, the flow of the electricity, and that gives you your glucose. So it's surprisingly sensitive marker of stress. So you could say, I'm going out in the cold, it'll go up. You could say, I got to stand up and give a talk, it'll go up. It's amazing, but it is non-specific. So it could be that I am stressed, it could be that I'm getting sick with COVID, it could be something else. But we're starting to look at these, and the thing the other way you test it, for those, once again, that are diabetics, the way that they've done this in the past, you can go to the doctor, you do a fasting morning blood glucose by sticking in a vein, you draw some blood off, send it off to the laboratory. But the other one is you do a finger prick with a lancet, and then you get a little drop of capillary blood, and you put it in this device, and it'll tell you what your blood sugar is in the blood. These do the interstitial fluids. They don't do the blood. It's in the tissue around where all the fat is. So the unfortunate part of this, if you look, so we were testing, this is some operator that instead of a oral glucose challenge test, maybe some of the women in the audience have had this. So when you're pregnant and they're worried about your glucose, they will give you this terribly nasty sugar, super concentrated sugar to drink, and then they draw your blood to see what your sugar is. This was the military version. There was some special forces guy that said, I'm going to get a Monster, and I'm going to drink it, and then I'm going to stick my finger, and I'm going to track my blood sugar. And the disconcerting part of this is you look how far apart these are. I mean, so the mean average percentage error is about 15%. Once again, that's not good enough for us to really be able to do a lot, if that's the... And then looking at one compared to the other. So wearing two of these at the same time, looking what you'll see, once again, it's about 10% difference from one to the other. So we can definitely do better. Whether or not it's new devices or new algorithms, we need to do a little better. And this is just another one that shows, this is the Stello looking at those are the individual glucose readings every 5 minutes. And you'll see there is a big difference, the peaks and the troughs. So we got some work to do, but that being said, it's still been useful. This is a good example of what we did. So this is me wearing a ketone sensor, continuous ketone monitor, and a continuous glucose monitor. I don't know if anyone in here is a ketogenic diet person. There you go. So IHMC, and particularly our director, Ken Ford, loves the ketogenic diet. He's been on it for pretty much his whole life. That's very good for having your ketone levels, obviously naturally occurring, go up. It's also good for having your glucose go down. And so we wore both of these at the same time. And what we needed to figure out in this particular study was there's a lot of traumatic brain injury in the military. There's a lot of traumatic brain injury in sports, and young people, unfortunately. So we were looking at what is called jump school. So teaching 17,000 warfighters a year. They run them through this training where they have to learn how to jump out of aircraft. And so, unfortunately, about 20% or so hit their head during their training, and more than one time. So there is a thought that maybe we could give this ketone esters, these ketone supplements, because they suppress inflammation and they drop your blood sugar. And the ketone esters might help do some other things, but we wanted to give this to these guys men and women, while they're doing their training, to maybe help them not have this traumatic brain injury. We had to figure out the dose. In order to do that, we did a study where we had them wear these things, and then we gave them doses and checked to see what their levels. And that's the tracing of someone gets this ketone ester, boom, you see the level go up, they're high, they get a second dose, it goes up, and then it goes back down to normal. And this is in the midst of their military activity, eating Burger King, meals ready to eat, where they're filled with carbohydrates. So this led us to this study that we just completed for SOCOM, which has some interesting data. It might be, we're going to have to do a follow-on study that's going to be bigger. So anyway, this was a successful use of these monitors. The lactate one is used, to do this, a lactate threshold, to look at how fit someone is. So it would be very interesting to have one of these devices that could be worn while you're exercising and doing various exercise-related assessments, but we also use it in the ICU. So when I am resuscitating someone who's been injured, we follow the lactate, and it's the same way if someone's septic, we follow the lactate. So there are a number of companies that are developing. We are, in fact, hopefully going to be starting some, either with these or with some microneedles, some new technology. We should hopefully be starting some studies with those lactate monitors in the next 3 to 6 months, which would be awesome. Super excited. So just since we're running a little bit, I'm going to go a little faster, so sorry about this. Extreme temperature testing. So there was a question about all these recovery techniques. You look at the athletes that got, hop in an ice bath or are putting these cups on them, So the question is whether or not any of these work. So tracking your heart rate variability and maybe tracking your glucose, it does actually, these things work in a sauna. That's 215 degrees. It stops communicating with the device, but then between the device and the phone, but then it downloads all the data once you get out of the sauna. And then same when you go in a cryotherapy room, that's a minus 180 degree treatment recovery room. So we tested this at that same BoldQuest. MOP gear is the personal protective equipment that is like for chemical, biological exposures. super heavy, super thick, super hot, especially in the summertime. So we had them put it on, these monitors, and then we ended up having their mop gear on and looking at them, and you'll see, yes, when they put their mop gear on, their glucose goes up, they get stressed. Then you'll see they end the exercise, oh, I'm feeling a little bit more relaxed, and then they have lunch. And they probably had some MREs or some other things, and yeah, needless to say, your glucose does go up when you eat. So, but across this, it's interesting, the Space Force is actually looking at using these wearable devices to get rid of their annual fitness test. So they're going to have people wear these devices sitting around doing their jobs. The Space Force are not going to space yet. The Guardians, they're sitting around looking at screens that have like images and other satellite stuff on it. So they maybe don't have the most active of lifestyles, but they do have to be able to pass their annual fitness. So that's a new project that we're potentially doing. And then the final one I'll sort of go into is vagal nerve stimulation. So that's the vagus nerve that I was talking about that goes from the brain down to the body and then back up. So it was interesting. So back in the day, oh goodness, so now it's about a decade ago, DARPA, right after I left DARPA, they were saying, we would like to do bioelectronic medicine. We're going to look at new bioelectronic devices. And I said, that's great. So they put out this targeted neuroplasticity training, which is basically they wanted a way to help people learn better. And it was from this vagal nerve stimulation, the original devices were for cluster headaches and some other things. They're treating people. You put it on your neck, you press a button, it gives you stimulation for 2 minutes, you take it off for 30 seconds, you do it again, and that's it. No side effects, thousands of people treated. The symptoms were getting better, the FDA approved it, but what they also noticed is that people were a little bit more energized, their mood was better, and they were learning maybe a little better as well. So we did some studies. We did some studies that actually rigorously looked at that and proved that this does improve you learn language better. So they learned Farsi better in the Defense Language Institute. Another one, it helped people with their mood, and they're doing tests after they have been awake for a long period of time. So I just put them up there just so you realize that there is some science behind this. I'm not going to go into it. But what we have done in this recent program is to make it, the military guys, men and women like it. So it's black and ominous, like skull and crossbones. They didn't want the big white, thing. They wanted, so this tax them is being used across all the services now. So they're really starting to look at it. It's all the services, various different, and we made a patch because the next thing that's potentially going to happen in the next bold quest is this critical care air transport. So when you're transporting injured patients or warfighters across the world, you have to go from wherever the war is back through all the roles of care until you get back to the military hospital. It would be very nice to have one in the back of a very dark, loud, vibration-filled aircraft where you couldn't get to the patient, where you just put it on them and you can stimulate them without having to get the device and put it on them and then hold it there. So it's a new patch that's coming that's going to be standalone. I have to just put a couple call-outs to IHMC. So this is our new Health Span Resilience Performance Research Complex and new 40,000 square foot facility, which is enabling all this stuff to happen. We just opened it this summer. And the counterpart here in Ocala is the AI machine learning that's making all this stuff happen. So this is more focused on some of the wearables and the genetics and epigenetics, but the data analysis, the AI machine learning, a lot of it is focused here. And that's what this is. So I was kidding around earlier about ChatGPT, but these large language models are crazy. They're crazy in that sometimes it sounds like you're talking to a person, and then other times it sounds like you're talking to someone that's hallucinating. So we definitely have to be careful, but these large language models, for example, they have some recent ones that looked at data from like 10,000 people wearing these glucose monitors, and they actually did a better job of, because it looked at what you're eating, what your activity is, in addition to what your interstitial food is. It could actually predict what your blood sugar was going to be better than, the devices, some of the devices. But the other thing that was crazy about it, it would actually predict, oh, you're going to have problems with your cholesterol. You're going to have a potential risk for stroke in 4 years. It starts to have these kind of very interesting things as well. So we are doing modeling in here, and they will get translated into these devices. So this is just to say that Polar is already starting to do some of this into their algorithms on their phones and their software development kit in their devices, where you'll see down below stress management, proof of concept, using heart rate variability, and then now they're starting to bring in the glucose monitors as well, and there's a coaching system. So that's where it's super fascinating to me, and this is where I was excited most, probably about 6 months ago. If you look at, as a surgeon, as a rider of a horse, as a piano player, we have to do our best, and performance is very important. And it's hard, as you can see from what I was talking about. But what is even harder is we have to do many of these things as a team. So how are you going to take all the data from these wearables on a single person and then multiply it down the bottom times 4 people that are in a team, or 8 people, or 12 people? And and then it goes one step further, and this is definitely IHMC's special sauce, is we are some of the world experts in human-machine teaming. So you have a team of 5 people or 5 team members, and one of them is an artificial intelligent agent. So you have to then and that's what this is. There's a lot of work right now with unmanned aerial vehicles and swarms of UAVs or satellites or other things. So that, I think, is the frontier of where some of these wearables will take us. As we get the data better, we synchronize the data, we throw in some voice analysis, which we have done in some of these projects, as obviously we do for Siri. You can hear how the team is talking with each other, how they're accomplishing their tasks, and then you throw in some AI in there, some agents. I think that is where we are really going to see this take off in the next, say, two years or so. And we're back to where we started. And with that, I think we're close to the end. I'll leave that up here to maybe prompt any discussions. Although I will say, if anyone also just wants to send me an email, I'm happy to engage and answer any questions there too.
I'm going to have questions. I am going to ask if anybody is leaving early, or even when you do leave, if we could go around the side door instead of going out the front now. We would really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, questions. Here we go, ma'am. Want to catch it?
Hi, thank you for that talk. I'm a retired physician and have always followed my fitness. This is an Apollo Neuro, if you're aware of that, okay?
Yeah.
I also do keto, thanks to IHMC.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I followed my fitness with Polar for 25 years, Polar Own Zone.
Yeah.
And I'm usually about 33, which for age 80 isn't bad.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an elite level of fitness.
Yeah.
With using this, I'm up to 41. Now, can I really rely on that? Is that really expanding my capability, or is this?
Your questions are exactly on target, and the short answer is it's unclear. But I was wearing the Apollo Neuro as well.
Yeah.
It uses vibration to help normalize stress, to help with stress recovery and sleep and focus and some other things. The caveat I'll say, if you look, for example, I'm wearing an Apple Watch, but before I've worn an Apple Watch and a Polar Grid X Pro at the same time, and an Oura Ring. The thing that's crazy is that they all will give you a score, but their scores do not necessarily correlate with each other. So it might be totally different from one versus the other. You might see changes in one and not in the other. So I would say stick with one like you're doing that works. And if it's increasing your heart rate variability for whatever the reason, I'd say by all means keep on using it. So.
Yeah, no, I like this one because it's not, the Oura Ring only gives me data.
Yeah.
This lets me change my data.
Yep. That is the complaint for a lot of people with the Aura Ring, is that it basically, maybe you do some habit forming with that, but it really doesn't let you do anything else. Yeah.
Well, you all will be glad to hear that Dave Rabin, who is Apollo Neuro, will be here
Yeah.
in this fall.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
sir?
Oh.
Well, great presentation. I also am a retired healthcare provider. My experience with stimulating the vagus nerve as a healthcare provider is usually bad outcomes, people throwing up, people passing out. What are you doing differently to stimulate the vagus nerve to produce good outcomes?
Yeah, so similarly, I would say in my career, I'm currently not practicing surgery anymore. So back in the day, we would put vagal nerve stimulators in. That's part of what we did. And there's side effects of any procedure, was the first I would say as a surgeon. But the reasons why, so first is it's non-invasive. So the side effect profile for this over tens of thousands of patients has been very good. No side effects, no bradycardia, no other issues really. So that's been great, and that's why you can use it in healthier people. That's the first thing. I would say from is it vagal nerve stimulation? It was fascinating to me because we had a bunch of basics at this DARPA meeting. So a while ago I was talking about where they were looking at vagal nerve stimulation. They had a bunch of the implantable vagal nerve guys that had the technology they were developing that were like, if you're not putting it around the vagal nerve, you're not stimulating it. They had some other guys who were PhDs from the NIH that were looking at monkeys and pigs and saying, oh, I know it's the vagal nerve. They could not wrap their mind around the fact that this was vagal nerve stimulation on the neck. It runs right here, and you can see it lighting up the right areas in the brain for it to be vagal nerve stimulation. But that being said, they couldn't even come to a consensus among the experts as to whether or not it was vagal nerve stimulation, but it has worked. I guess that's the thing from my standpoint, that the imaging suggests, the heart rate data suggests that it is vagal nerve stimulation, and but there is still some debate about why that is successful and why some other ones have all these side effects. Some of it's stimulation parameters too, so you can increase the amount of current that's going into the frequency of it, and it will activate different fibers in the nerve. So that's part of it as well. It's device specific, but good question.
Okay, okay. Sir, I got you, but I had one back here in the back first. All right, Jenny, I'm gonna try to throw.
Job. I have a question about privacy on terms of, I know the Freestyle Libre is coming out with 2 subscription devices for well people to track. Yep. And if what you were just showing about interstitial glucose, even suggesting concerns for cholesterol and other things that could be happening, how do we protect ourselves as individuals from insurance companies denying coverage because you might have risk?
So, yeah, I have the test flight version. So the Lingo has, I've agreed to be a guinea pig on this. So it's a test flight on the Apple iPhone, and then you have these apps, and they do gather a lot of data, and you got to sign your. But that being said, Apple and they're not as bad, but Google collects all our data. I mean, literally, it's. I won't go on a rant, but if Ken Ford was here and we started talking about the amount of data that is collected and what's done with it, it is disconcerting. We need privacy protection. I think that, in addition, so from a medical standpoint, every day I get updates. The 2 things that seem to be, so diversity, equity, inclusion are very important. So there's a new women's health initiative that's coming. But AI, machine learning, everything, multiple things a day, but they need humongous amounts of data for that. And then the final one that every day we get something about is privacy and security. It's not a solved problem, but if you protect it the right way, if you encrypt it, you make sure that you have it set up in a way. That's IHMC does some of Internet of Things and networking and data protection and cyber, so we do that. You can make it more secure, but then you got to eventually get to the point of how much power does that cost you on the device, and are you really sharing your data in a way that you're going to be included in the health outcomes that are going to come from this? Because that's definitely been true in like Native Americans and some other groups. A black community, I mean, they have been, unfortunately, their data has been used in ways that has not been supportive of their health. So they don't, a lot like the Native community. My wife has a little bit of a Native heritage, and some of the Native communities are unwilling to participate in the studies because the privacy was compromised and the data was used in ways that it was not good. So it is important, but I wish I had a better answer for you than that, but it needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I noticed that you have a diving background, as do we.
Nice.
I was wondering, the advent of dive computers in the late 80s, 1980s, followed by the chamber operators collecting them from people who had not exceeded their bottom time, but still got bent.
Yep.
I was wondering whether there's anything on the horizon that could take a look at the bubble content of your blood and tell you when you're potentially in a problem area or when you should do something about it.
Because we're still diving.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you should come work at IHMC. So we actually just put
I'm
in...
retired.
Yeah, we put in a proposal in the last 2 weeks that is, in fact, to look at some wearables and AI machine learning. It's for 2 different populations, but it's related. So I did my stuff in the astronaut office as undersea saturation missions as part of long-duration spaceflight training, so expeditionary. So the 2 communities, I mentioned that because they're related. It's the same when you're doing EVAs, extravehicular activities, or spacewalks, as it is when you're doing diving. And so what we had, that went in was a combination of the Navy Experimental Dive Unit in Panama City, as well as NASA, looking at new dive AI machine learning with some bubble detection with some wearables, because they're now wearable ultrasound devices, and helping out both those that are going to be walking on the surface of the moon and those that are doing some long duration strange gas mixed diving for the military. Yeah, but by the way, I wore my Ultra when I went diving, and it was disappointing to me because it was cold and I was wearing a wetsuit. This was giving me all kinds of errors because it wasn't up against my skin. And I'm like, whoever designed this?
Another vagus nerve question. Have you ever done a study with a placebo bad boy looking military device versus the actual stimulator to show how the language is increased, the speed of learning a second language, and what is the hypothesis of how that works?
So we did that. We did the initial study. So all of these are sham controlled. So basically you get this device, you put it on. You get one that looks just like it, except that it vibrates and makes some clicking noises as opposed to giving electrical stimulation. So the user does not know, the person who's administering it probably does, but at least the user does not know. And then you have them do certain tests over a period, in this case, of 3 months. And we found that it improved. The first one was for what's called intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So you're looking at images, and you have to say, that one has now got a rocket launcher here. That one's got a tank here where it didn't have it before. And so you have to be able to do change detection and target recognition. And it improved their learning rate by 20%. And it lasted for months. And so then we did it in language, and it did the same in language. And granted, it didn't work for everybody, but it worked statistically significant with a sham control. And there's all kinds of thoughts as to why the locus coeruleus and dopamine stimulation and then but I'll be honest, we don't know the mechanism all the way. We looked originally at some animal studies. We looked also at some biomarkers, some changes. Maybe it's related to the genes in their body as to why they're more susceptible. Maybe it's that they're having the change in the readout of their genes, their epigenetics, and we couldn't find the reason. It worked. So I guess it's safe. Those are the two things but a good question, and I wish I knew the answer.
I was just wondering what advances are being made into differing how different people with different genetics are going to react to different stimuli. Like one person will have a different heart rate when they get COVID versus another person when they get the flu. It could be they could look the same, but it's going to be two different diseases.
Yeah, that's a great question. We did some of that work. So I didn't get into any of the genetic, epigenetic related research that I did, but I'll just mention a couple projects you can look up. Well, you might not see much on it, but one was called Precision High Intensity Training Through Epigenetics, or FIGHT, which is a good military acronym. So it was a Navy project looking at people just coming in and whether or not high intensity, like CrossFit kind of training was better than traditional training, and it looked at all the changes in the genes and all the changes in the genes. So we did some similar work in some other projects for DARPA, looking at exposure to COVID. From a military standpoint, not to go too deep into this, but the big things that are threats are chemical agents, biological agents like COVID or flu or Ebola, radiologic agents and nuclear agents, and then explosives. So that's called C-Bernie. So we actually did a study that looked at the changes in your gene readout all the way down to the single cell level when you're exposed to some of these things. And you can see some difference in how susceptible people are. And one that's probably, I would say, we're going to have to figure out. There's, I don't know if anyone in the family has had genetic testing done before for family members, but there are some that are risk factors for diseases that are known, like ApoE4, this particular one that for your cholesterol management is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, but it's also probably a big risk factor if you're getting your head hit in military training for having brain injury. So we're going to have to figure out whether or not we're going to test everybody when they're coming in and then say, hey, you might be the most talented man or woman in the world, but based on the fact that you got these two things, if you were getting exposed, hitting your head during parachute jumping, or you're getting exposed to firing a weapon, you would have traumatic brain injury, pretty significant risk for it. So those are things that need to be done that we've started to do, but we haven't really figured out all the details of that. And it's sort of like some of this wearables. The problem is you got to be pretty darn sure you know what you're talking about if you're changing someone's life or their career or trying to treat them. Because if you don't and you do something that hurts them, then you are at fault. So, and that's what we are for the military for some of these wearables. You might say, oh, you don't have to take your fitness exam if you're a Space Force Guardian, but what happens if you say, oh, you're not going to be a pilot, a fighter pilot. I know you wanted to do that since the time you're 5 years old, but you got this irregular heart rate we're seeing once in a while on this wearable device, and no one knows what it really means. So, so it's the same for the genetics, because we gathered in one of those studies, it was like 20 terabytes worth of data, because we're looking at down to the individual cell level, all these different things. So that must be a sign for us to go, that I hear them